We live in troubling times.
Yeah, that's for sure. Hello, team, and welcome to Beerocracy. I'm your host, Emily Gross. I'm very excited today because I have Professor Richard Pierce with me, who is a professor of law at GW Law School, which I almost went to GW. My mom did go to GW. Richard, very happy to have you here.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here with you, Emily.
So we are going to be talking all about what's been going on with Trump invoking the Alien Enemies Act, 1789, and then the migration flights from the U.S. to El Salvador of Venezuelan migrants and all the legal issues surrounding that. But before we dive in, we're recording this early. And Richard, I didn't tell you this, but today is actually my birthday. And so I would not want to be here with anyone else talking about violations of law. But I'm drinking coffee. Richard, what are you drinking?
Same thing.
Cheers. All right. So the question I always love to ask my guests is, why should we trust what you have to say?
Oh, trust me?
Yeah.
No, I don't know. I've been at this racket for almost 60 years now. I've been teaching law, writing about administrative law, written a whole lot of books and a whole lot of articles. And a lot of my writings have been cited in hundreds of court opinions, and some of them in over a dozen U.S. Supreme Court opinions. So I think I know something about the subject. I just keep at it every day. I just finished teaching about it a few minutes ago, and I got another class this afternoon on it.
Perfect. Well, I'm happy to have you in between. So let's talk a little bit about it. So Trump signed an executive order that brought the Alien Enemies Act of 1789 back into play. Could you provide insight into what that is and why this is a big deal?
Sure. It's a statute that was passed, of course, hundreds of years ago, that authorizes empowers the president in an emergency involving either a war or an invasion to take a lot of actions with respect to foreign nationals, including deporting them with no hearings, no procedure whatsoever, just doing it. It's a statute that has been invoked only 3 times in history: the War of 1812, World War I, and World War II. And now this is the 4th time it's ever been invoked.
So obviously this was the act that was used for the Japanese internment camps. So it's a pretty big deal. What gives Trump the basis to declare that we're at war?
Well, his claim, he's not claiming that we're at war. He's claiming that we've been invaded. And it's going to be interesting to see how the courts eventually resolve this. Unfortunately, it takes our judicial system years to reach a final decision on any matter this important. So all the decisions that we're going to be seeing in the next few weeks, first from the district judge, and then from the Court of Appeals, and then from the Supreme Court on its emergency docket, most likely, are going to be in the context of preliminary injunctions. They are not going to be decisions on the merits. They're going to be based on a judge or justice's beliefs about the likely outcome of the dispute on the merits. And the question in each case is going to be, there's going to be 2 questions. First, is this an invasion? And that's not an easy question to answer. The courts are going to struggle with it. And they're also going to struggle with the related question of whether, since we're dealing in foreign relations and national security, is this even the kind of question that a court should review, or should it simply say this is a political question? We leave it entirely to the president to determine whether there has been an invasion.
This will be interesting. So obviously there's been a lot of back and forth with the judge who's been overseeing this case in the immediate, because it appears that the Trump administration violated the court orders. Why? Because apparently there was 3 flights, and apparently the Trump admin is saying two of them were already over international waters, but then apparently the third then just got up and kept going to El Salvador. What's your input on this? Does it appear that the Trump admin violated these orders?
I think it's going to be hard to pin that down, to pin down the facts of, there's always time lag between the issuance of a court order and the communication of instructions to the people who need to respond to the court order. And I'm not sure we're ever going to know for sure, or that even the district judge will know for sure, whether the Trump administration violated his orders. It's right now, it is a disputed question of fact. They claim that they did not. He is very concerned that they seem to have. Pinning down the details of the timing is not going to be easy.
Interesting. So this act appears to get rid of all due process for migrants. Is that correct?
Yes.
It's crazy to me that he can just be like, and what's happened, been like, yes, we're in invasion. We're being invaded. So that means no one gets due process, right? And it appears that like the argument is because of the Venezuelan Tren to Aragua gang, but only like, I think 250 people were sent on these flights and like 45 maybe had ties. Is there anything that can happen retroactively to get these people that have been transported over to El Salvador to get them their due process?
No, that would be really difficult because there are circumstances in which a federal judge can issue a preliminary injunction that prohibits some federal agency, or in this case, even the president himself, from taking an action based on the court's belief that the action may well violate the law and the court's desire to have some period of time, even if it's only a few days, in order to consider whether it violates the law and to pin down the facts enough to form any opinion about that. And the district judge, at least initially, just wanted that amount of time and so issued the injunction. Whether the administration knowingly violated the injunction or whether the continuation of the flights was just attributable to inevitable time lag in communicating the judge's order, you got to pin down. And then the question is, a court can preliminarily enjoin an action. It's much, much harder for a court to justify an affirmative order, an order saying you must, for instance, return this. But a judge can, in some circumstances, if he finds that the party before him has violated a court order and taken some action, then a judge has some power to order that party to take actions that restore the status quo ante. That power, though, is more limited than the power to enjoin the action in the first place. So that's going to be another controversy that will initially be resolved by the district judge, and then we'll go to the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, and then we'll go to the Supreme Court on its emergency docket.
Yeah. No, I mean, the Trump administration's objective is to get everything to the Supreme Court. But it was a pretty, I think, impressive rebuke from Chief Justice Roberts to come back against the Trump admin for calling for the impeachment of the judge because they don't like what he's saying. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I certainly agree with you that it's an extraordinary action when the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court basically admonishes, without naming him, but it admonishes the President of the United States or any other major public official for engaging in inappropriate language with respect to a judge. So that's really quite an important development. It's happened a few times previously in history, most recently when the Chief Justice admonished Senator Schumer for having made some quite inappropriate comments about some judges and justices. But it's a big deal when the Chief Justice of the United States feels so strongly about something that he comes out publicly to address it.
Absolutely. Has the Supreme Court ever considered the Alien Enemies Act of 1789 before?
Sure, in Korematsu, but then it changed his mind about Korematsu. It upheld the.
Could you elaborate more about what it was?
Well, Korematsu was not sending the Japanese Americans back to Japan, but imprisoning them. Basically, we imprisoned. These were not even in the same status as the Venezuelan citizens who were just deported. These were U.S. citizens. Many of them had been U.S. citizens for a very long time. And what the government did without any due process, any hearings at all, is send them to a whole bunch of internment camps and take away all their property at the same time, by the way. So that action was, I think, arguably more outrageous than the actions taken in this case.
Absolutely. So the Supreme Court ruled that was an acceptable use of the Alien Enemies Act?
The Supreme Court upheld that initially, and then a couple of decades ago, it, I think, appropriately stated that it no longer adhered to the views that it expressed in the Korematsu decision.
Interesting. Very interesting. Is there anything else you would like to touch on before we wrap up? I feel like this is so informative, but it's a very niche situation.
This is one of at least 60, probably more than that, actions that the Trump administration has taken since Inauguration Day that raised very serious issues of legality, both under statutes and under the Constitution. And our judicial system, I think, functions pretty well when the Supreme Court has 3 to 5 years to allow really major issues like this to percolate through multiple federal district courts and multiple federal circuit courts in order to get the opinions of a lot of judges with varying perspectives on the law, on the issues involved, based on consideration of briefs and the like. And then the Supreme Court, typically 3 to 5 years after the issue is raised, makes a well-informed decision on the issue. Our judicial system is not designed to function well in an environment in which there are 50 or 60 such decisions raised, issues raised in a 2 to 3 month period. Our courts perform best when they have lots of time for deliberation. They perform worst when they're responding instantaneously to emergency situations. And that, unfortunately, is the situation they're in now with respect to this and at least 60 other actions that the Trump administration has taken that raise very serious questions of legality.
One last question, because I remember seeing an article recently saying, with a Trump official anonymously saying that this is just the beginning of some of the grand immigration actions that they are going to be taking that are going to make them their way up to the Supreme Court. This feels like one of the most extreme actions that can be taken in regards to immigration. What else maybe comes to mind for you about what else they could potentially do?
Well, I think there's a good chance we'll see more of the same. Our system for removing people who are not citizens from the United States takes a long time to implement. We only have about 300 immigration judges, and they have a very long backlog of cases that they have to consider. And Trump is not a patient person, I think, in any context, and he's certainly not a patient person in this context. So what I think we'll see is a whole lot more actions taken through invocation of the Alien Enemies Act. And they'll arise in many, many different factual circumstances. And eventually the Supreme Court is going to have to provide the answer, at least on a temporary basis, on its emergency docket, to the question of whether the president is violating some judicially enforceable boundaries on his power.
Wow. All right. It's certainly be interesting, as it's already been and will continue to be. It's been a whirlwind, and they're just, like you said, judicial overload is remarkable and designed to be as such. Richard, any last comments?
We live in troubling times.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, things could be better for sure. Yeah, it's definitely a constitutional question overload at the moment. And it definitely feels like we are fighting for democracy. But yeah. So, Richard, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you. And I'm your host, Emily Gross. We'll be back next week with another episode of Bureaucracy.